Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence Podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is
Lesson 22, Alma chapters 5 through 7. Have ye experienced this mighty change in your hearts?
In this episode, Rod hosts Rian Nelson, his good friend who has been his event coordinator for the Book of Mormon Evidence Conferences over the last several years. Rian is quite the avid map maker and is an author, editor, and speaker himself. Rod and Rian talk about how they met, as Rian has always loved the Book of Mormon and its heroes, and he spent 40 years searching for the location where Nephi and Moroni lived, served, and fought for their freedom. He loves the Lamanites and served a mission to Phrygia and Kiribati. His own parents met each other while serving the Navajos, Apaches, and Hopis in New Mexico and Arizona, and his son served his mission among the Lamanites in Alaska. Rian is married to his eternal companion Stacy, and they have 2 married children and a 4-year-old grandchild named Brooklyn. Enjoy the podcast.
Hi, this is Rod Meldrum, and I am very excited about having our another guest here with a Come Follow Me, a supplemental podcast that we're doing. I hope you're enjoying these podcasts. It's been just really a pleasure to be able to do this and to be able to offer these for folks they can share with other people as well. So this is going to be actually a 4-week podcast here. We're going to separate them into each individual lesson. So we're going to start with actually lesson number 22, which is Alma chapters 5 through 7. The reason why we're going to do these 4 in a row is because Alma, and this is the beginning of Alma and his journeys of his missionary work and so forth, and also the sons of Mosiah. It starts to get into more of the geography questions, and so we're going to have an in-depth treatise on geography here over the next 4 weeks. So I hope you can buckle up and join us. It's going to be an awesome thing. So this is going to comprise basically then lesson 22, Alma chapter 5 through 7. We're also going to be then going through Alma chapters 8 through 12. That's number 23, lesson 23. And also lesson 24, Alma chapters 13 through 16, and then we're going to finish up with Alma chapters 17 to 22. Those of you who have been aware of the geography of the Book of Mormon know that Alma chapter 22 is kind of the most broadest chapter when it comes down to the geography of the Book of Mormon. So I want to have a little bit of discussion here to begin with as to why the geography part actually even matters. And I have with me my dear friend Rian Nelson. He is our executive producer of all of our events and so forth, and he's had an amazing life experience of doing events. We're excited about having him. He's also worked a lot with Jonathan Neville and so forth, but I'm going to have him give a little bit of introduction for himself here. So Rian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, I'm grateful to be here. I don't think there's anything that excites me more than understanding the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon to me has always been a spiritual joy. But when I first got into looking and researching, I was always taken to Mesoamerica. And I would go to every Mesoamerica group study, lesson, extra thing here or there, and take notes. In fact, I've got my Book of Mormon at home that I've taken notes in, and this doesn't make sense, or that didn't. How do you get here? And I just finally, after probably 7 or 8 years of figuring that out, just during my mission and after, I go, man, I'm just going to give up. Okay, Moroni got the plates. He buried them in New York after he had traveled somewhere. Maybe the Lord just magically put the gold plates from Mexico into Comoro. I don't know, but I give up. I don't know what happened. The church isn't helping me, but I know the Lord's not going to do something we can't do on ourselves, but you know what? And so I just kind of became complacent in trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And man, I first met Rod. We won't get into too much detail, but it was from a felon.
Oh, that's true, huh? That's
from
right.
A guy who was putting together a magazine and advertising to put together a magazine we were doing that would show off art. Because I ended up loving art, which I never thought I would, because I always loved sports. Thought art was ridiculous. Now I love art. So we were putting this magazine together, and this guy who we won't mention, he said, go over to this guy's address and pick up a check. He wants to advertise in our magazine. I said, okay. So I went over to his house. It was Rod Meldrum. And first time I met him, hi, how are you? Come on. And he was 6'32".
Well, tell
and
tell him what the art was for. What was this?
Well, it was to display art. We had events at the Joseph Smith Building. We had events that portrayed Liz Lemon Swindle and Arnold Freeberg and all these other people. And we put a magazine together that we would get people like Rod to pay for the ads in the magazine so we could hand those out free to people during General Conference. And we did that 3 or 4 times. I had a big display at Joseph Smith Building, and it was wonderful.
It had this whole art, it had. I just remember a lot of the Arnold Freeberg, his unknown paintings, or partially like ones that he didn't complete, and also sketches that he had made of in advance of his stuff.
They were so cool. Arnold Freeberg was my big hero back then. He's not as much now because he talked about Central America too much.
Well, he
was great.
Well, he was commissioned by, I guess it was the primary president.
Yeah.
Who said, we don't have any
and
good
the primary
art in the church
president
for the Book of Mormon.
Paid for it out of her own pocket, not the church's.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was into that whole deal, and we had this picture of Nephi, and it said Nephi with a sketch of Nephi, and it said Charlton Heston as Nephi, signed by Arnold Freeberg. We had all this different art of him, and it was wonderful. Anyway, Rod wanted to participate in this magazine. I come over to his house to get some money, and it was a lot of money we were asking him for. And I sat down at his home with him, and after he probably spent 20 minutes on the phone before he even got to me. I do remember that. That's Rod.
I
15.
get a lot of phone calls.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
And then I waited my turn, and I got to Rod, and I talked to him a little bit about what we were doing. We kind of hit it off. He started telling me about these different things in the gospel and in the Book of Mormon. I started talking to him, I remember, and at the very end, he gave me some money to put an ad in our magazine that featured Book of Mormon evidence. And this was probably about 2011 or 12, something like that. And I just became instant friends with him. And I went home and I started looking at some of this. What's he telling me? I didn't understand totally where he was going with this because I didn't know anything about North America and all this other stuff. And I remember a week or so went by, and Rod, for some reason, came over to my house. I was getting all excited about the book, and he came over to bring me a book or something. He sat there in my kitchen, opened up his book here, the Book of Mormon, America's Heartland, and started talking to me. Oh, have you heard about the mounds? I remember that's one of the first words I ever heard him say about that. Have you heard about the mounds? I go, the mounds?
You mean the chocolate bar?
Yeah, I honestly had no idea what you were talking about. And I felt I was pretty intellectual, but when he told me, he said, well, all these mounds all over North America. I acted like I knew what he was talking about. Okay, whatever. He goes home. I go up to my computer, and I just type in Indian mounds, North America, and I go, oh my, what? There's the Indian, how many are, oh my heaven. I was just awestruck at Indian mounds I never knew about. I knew all about the United States of America and all. But an Indian mound? Why would I not know that? It blew me away, okay? So anyway, I started studying, and when I got into, on my own, the Zelf story, oh my heavens, I became a Zelfaholic. I'm telling you.
He was pretty self-absorbed.
I got a great self-image. Okay?
That's right. And you have to be true to yourself.
But my self-image is stronger than yours.
Okay, all right, there we go.
Okay.
All right, okay.
Okay, so anyway, I just loved him, and I read the story, and it came from the church history. It was Joseph Smith saying there was a white Lamanite who part of the curse was taken and removed, and he fought with the Nephites in one of the last great battles. I go, what? Really? How come I didn't know about this? And I now vaguely remember maybe in seminary. I don't know. But I don't remember it like that. And then it talked about this guy named Onondagas. There was a prophet from the Rocky Mountain to Hill Cumorah. And I go, what? This is cool. I remember going back to him saying, you know what? You are absolutely right. I don't care about anything else. There's thousands of mounds. There's Zelf. And Joseph Smith said it, and it has to be true. And from there on, I was 100% in that camp, and I have enjoyed the ride ever since. It's been so phenomenal.
It kind of sucks you in.
Oh,
Yeah, that's how it's been with me. Basically, is that as I got started with this, and just kind of for a little bit of information here, a lot of people want to know kind of the background history of how things kind of happened, and just let me give you just about a 3 or 4 minute background as to the geography of the Book of Mormon and kind of some of the different ideas that have happened and how they kind of came about. And basically, if you go all the way back to the time of Joseph Smith, there were a lot of. By the way, we have DVDs and books and hopefully, I don't know if you can see this or not, but we are covered here with books here. These are just some of the books that I have had in my collection I've read to try to become an expert or a scholar on this particular subject area. They say if you spend 10 years intensively studying something, you become an expert in that subject. And it's been a lot longer than that because I've been studying the Book of Mormon before that. But the geography part itself now for going on about 14, 15 years. Intensively, and I'm going to explain it and show you all of you just some of these books as we go through this over the next couple of weeks. But basically, so kind of a little bit of a background here. I guess the first thing that I would like to talk about just with you, and that is that the idea of the geography of the Book of Mormon, and does it really even matter? Because I've had so many different people say, well, when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter where the Book of Mormon took place. The only thing that matters is that it took place someplace. But I have, over the course of time, and most everybody who has gotten more and more involved with this, from Tim Ballard to many, many other, literally hundreds of thousands of people who now are embrace that the Book of Mormon is an actual history, and that history actually did happen someplace, and that someplace is North America. Where did that all come from, and why does it matter?
Well, what about this? Why does it matter? It would not get us into the celestial kingdom if we didn't know where Jesus was born. Mm-hmm. Would it? I know Jesus lives, and he's the Son of God, but I don't have to know where he was born. Mm-hmm. Okay? Well, I don't have to know where the Book of Mormon happened, but man, don't you love to know where the Savior lived and walked? And you can visit there, and you can touch things. Well, that's how the Book of Mormon is to me. The Book of Mormon is by far my favorite scriptures. Exactly. Okay, all the others great, but the Book of Mormon is the most correct of any book on this earth, and I love it. And so when I found something that I could even strengthen my testimony with by actually knowing where Nephi possibly walked and talked and lived, that's what I was looking for all my life. I thought it was in Mesoamerica somewhere, and I was looking after nothing because nothing exists down there. Not that I have found, and that doesn't mean I'm right and they're not. Well, it kind of does. No, it doesn't. It means really that I have no persuading evidence that it happened down there, and I studied that for 35, 40 years. Yeah. Well, I've studied this for 10. Yeah. And it's like, wow.
And it makes. I'll tell you what. The reason why to me this is important. And I've mentioned this to different people in presentations and so forth before, but it's like you said, I don't think anybody's going to be denied access to the celestial kingdom if they can't properly identify the lands of the Book of Mormon, mm-hmm. because it's not that kind of a thing. But on the other hand, truth always matters.
Yes.
And the reason why I believe that this matters is because there are getting to be more and more people who actually believe in the doctrines of the Book of Mormon, but don't believe that it's an actual history.
Right.
Believe that it's actually an inspired fiction, that Joseph Smith basically lied about it and made up this book, and he was brilliant, and it was maybe even inspired, but this has nothing to do with a real world actual place. Right. The reason why the Bible has such an impact on people's lives is that it talks about Jerusalem, and you can go there. Yeah. It talks about the Sea of Galilee, you can go there. You can actually be there in Capernaum, and you can actually see the synagogue where Christ was actually there. Mm-hmm. We know he was physically there, or the house of Caiaphas. when he was being held there before his crucifixion and so forth. These are things that verify the truthfulness and the reality of the Bible.
Moroni said we can know the truth of all things.
That's right.
And to
but not
me,
just the spiritual stuff.
That's right. And
Yeah.
the evidence, the physical evidence, to me, it might be secondary evidence, but it is so cool. It really is. And to see the mounds up close with you and to see how they fit and to find head plates and copper plates and arrowheads. And
breastplates.
I went to Apalachicola, Florida and found a piece of pottery, and I think it was Nephi's cereal bowl. It was so cool. It was dated from an anthropologist at Southern Florida to be 600 BC. Her name's Nancy White, University of South Florida. And I was there picking this stuff up, and I got it at home. It's like, wow, people lived here.
Yeah, the archaeological evidence is awesome, but even beyond, I guess I would say more of a spiritual thing. So basically, what has happened in the past as far as, well, let me just explain a little bit more about why I think the geography does matter. In the Book of Mormon, actually in the Doctrine and Covenants, it says in section 3 in the Doctrine and Covenants, it actually states that the reason why the plates were preserved was so that the prophecies and the promises that are contained therein would be made known in the latter days, and that the remnant of the Lamanites would be able to get that information and then realize who they are, that they are the covenant people of God, and that then they will basically embrace the gospel of Jesus Christ after having seen this. Well, if the prophecies and the promises that are contained in the book are the main reason why the plates were preserved, that obviously is to testify of Jesus Christ as well. But it's funny because that's not actually what the Lord said to Joseph Smith in the Doctrine and Covenants in the Revelation there in section 3. But what the interesting part to me is that there's a covenant and there's a covenant nation. And they talked about when Lehi left Jerusalem, he said, the Lord told him, I'm going to bring you to a promised land. That means a land that has some kind of promise to it, some kind of a covenant associated with it. And if you go all the way back through world history to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, there was a covenant there. The first promised land was named after Adam's great-grandson, and it was there in the heartland of America, basically around the Adirondack area is where that was located. That was the covenant land. There was a covenant that was so important, and if they obeyed the covenant, then they got to stay on that land. But if they disobeyed the covenant, then they were going to get swept off the land, which they did at the time of Noah and the ark. Mm-hmm. Noah built his ark here in America, and the ark ended up over in the mountains of Ararat over in the Old World. And then God established a new promised land over there and gave it a covenant, which we now call today the Abrahamic covenant. Yeah. But basically, Abraham was given a specific land, again, called the land of Canaan. Both of them are called Canaan. Okay, and then the people over there forgot about this covenant. And this covenant is so critical. And if you want to know more about this, if you want to watch the podcast that we did with Timothy Ballard, with Tim Ballard, about this covenant relationship. But the reason for the Book of Mormon, basically, other than testifying of Jesus Christ, which of course is the first thing, is to basically show the remnant Lamanites that there is a history. Their history is here, and that they came from Jerusalem and so forth, and that they are the covenant people of God. Yeah. And when you realize that the importance of this covenant, now the covenant talks about a nation. It was a nation among other nations. It was a mighty, that in the latter days, this nation would become a mighty Gentile nation above all other nations.
Marvelous work.
There would be a marvelous work and a wonder would come from this, yes. Yeah. And also, it talks specifically about the New Jerusalem would be built on the Book of Mormon lands.
That's a no-duh. I mean,
we know where the New Jerusalem is by revelation. This is not speculation. Right. This is revelation from God. Right. Where the New Jerusalem is going to be built, and it's not going to be built in Guatemala.
Well, and the sad thing for me is a lot of these people, they want to downplay the Garden of Eden and Adirondack and so forth. They want to downplay and say, no, it was all of Gomorrah. It's all the way up to the Greenland, all the way to the tip of South America. That's the promised land. Well, you know what? Maybe it's better than other lands. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But I know this little section we call the United States of America that is the only land where there's a constitution that was created by the Lord himself on this land.
It raised up men for the very purpose.
That's right. That has to be, to me, the promised land. It doesn't mean I'm better than somebody. Doesn't mean you're not good and whoever comes here and partakes of the covenant and actually builds up this church, it's a covenant land.
Right. And actually the scriptures themselves limit the geography, at least in the latter days, as a nation among other nations. So it couldn't be the entire hemisphere, because that's not, there's no way you can consider that to be a nation.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a hemisphere. But a nation it has borders and boundaries. It said that nation would never be ruled by a king.
Separate government.
Which tells you that it has a different governmental system than everybody else has. It won't have a king. That's not talking about a hemisphere. That's talking about a specific nation that has a government that's at its head. Yeah. And then when you add in the fact that the Lord said that he raised up men for the very purpose of establishing this particular government. He said it was going to be a Gentile nation above all other nations, and I think that's undisputed, that the United States is that nation. How could anyone really believe that Guatemala is the nation that is being described here, and that the Book of Mormon happened in Guatemala, and that's where all the Book of Mormon happened, but then they say that they are on the lands, and in the Ether twice it says that they are on the lands which will one day become the New Jerusalem.
And something I think is important that I share is we understand that the Book of Mormon geography to the church that we love, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we support the prophet and apostles immensely.
Absolutely.
They have said, and it's not, I guess they've said that in the gospel essays that they have put up online, that it is neither Mesoamerica, it's not the United States, it's just, it could be one of those, but we haven't heard. We don't know. We're kind of neutral.
We're neutral, yeah.
And so what I think of that, maybe I understand the church being neutral, but I don't have to be neutral.
That's right.
Okay? I get to delve into and find things, not delve into weird stuff. I'm delving into the truest book in the world. This is the Book of Mormon. I'm delving into it like I'm living it. And so we have this passion for the Book of Mormon, but we understand the church and the brethren and what they say.
The fact is, there is only one truth. The bottom line is that the Book of Mormon happened someplace. It was an actual history of real people, places, and events. And it happened someplace. And that someplace can't be two places at the same time. And it happened in a specific area. And
it can't be Cumorah, New York, and Cumorah, Mexico?
In Central America.
I don't think it can either.
Is there two hill Cumorahs? I mean, the idea of a two hill Cumorah thing actually came from the Community of Christ. Actually, before them, it was the restored or RLDS.
Yeah. Well, and all that Benjamin Winchester stuff. Wow.
Yes.
And all that stuff you want to read about.
Probably most of you don't know about that yet. So this is just the Lost City of Zarahemla by Jonathan Neville.
I mean, there's some great stuff in there that we
talk
call
about
the
origins of the Mesoamerica theory
of geography. Because we go, if you read this, you'll know that in the times and seasons, Joseph Smith did not talk about Mesoamerica.
Yeah, that's all been debunked.
Okay? It's been shown that Benjamin Winchester, who was on Zion's camp at age 16 with Joseph, wrote about this. He started out as a great missionary. Yeah. But he wanted to prove that the Book of Mormon is a real history because look at all those great ruins down there. Well, those great ruins are 800 A.D. Yeah. How could they be associated with the Nephites?
Nothing to do with the Book of Mormon.
It didn't.
Yeah. But he was very enamored with that. And also he wanted to tie the Book of Mormon in with actually the very first ever New York Times best-selling set of books called Incidents of Travel in Central America.
By
and he said, if we could just tie the Book of Mormon into the number one best-selling book, well, it's actually the very first ever best-selling New York Times book, then that we would have, think of how the world would have to accept the Book of Mormon because we're tying it to this grand civilization that they're all learning about right now. He's all excited about it, but Joseph Smith didn't share apparently his enthusiasm because when he received a copy of the books from John Bernheisel, through Wilford Woodruff. John Bernheisel was in New York. Wilford Woodruff was coming back.
You know too much.
Picked up a copy of the book.
Let him get the book.
Gave it to Joseph Smith. Yeah. And basically, Joseph Smith ended up giving the book to the Nauvoo Library because he kept most of the other books that he thought were important, but those were apparently not that important.
Jonathan Neville has pointed that out in that book.
It's just phenomenal.
Had so much to do. He was with the Mesoamerican group for years and years and years and still is friends with them.
Been down there 20, 30 times.
They don't like him. He says he likes them, and I believe it because we talk about them.
Yeah.
But I think they've got a little under their skin that there's somebody that is potentially correct and could put a cover on this Meso stuff. But man, Jonathan Neville's written 15, 20 books just on North American geography.
Yeah.
It's been amazing.
If you want to know more about the history behind the Book of Mormon and specifically how we ended up with this idea that the Book of Mormon happened down in the impoverished, drug lord torn nation of Guatemala and southern Mexico, and that the promised land is that and not the United States of America, actually goes all the way back to these guys like Benjamin Winchester and Joseph Smith's little brother William, and articles that they snuck into the Times and Seasons while Joseph Smith was in hiding. And then they were too cowardly to put their actual names on there, so they just put an ED for editor.
And Joseph reprimanded
people just assumed them. Yes.
Many times. Once in the Times and Seasons said, "You, Benjamin Winchester,
will be silenced,
and will take away your license as an elder. You cannot preach."
And it turns out, brothers and sisters, that the entire Mesoamerica the origins of the Mesoamerican theory came essentially from 3 apostates in the early church. There was Benjamin Winchester, who was an apostate, and then Joseph Smith's little brother William,
right,
and then John Page. So the entire foundations and origins of the Mesoamerica theory came from 3 people who basically were apostates. You had John Page, who was in the Quorum of the 12.
That's right.
You had Benjamin Winchester
and William Smith,
Joseph Smith's little brother,
and they were always at each other.
And they actually started 3 different splinter groups.
Strangites and a couple others.
And they were the ones began the preaching of the Central American ideas in their different groups. But Brigham Young and John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff, they were not pushing the Mesoamerica thing. I mean, we have no evidence that they were doing that.
Well, look at that today. The Community of Christ, which is what they call the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints now, they believe the Mesoamerica big time.
Yes.
But Rod and I he's been there 2 or 3 times to St. Louis,
change over,
or right into Independence, where we spend time talking to the Restorationist groups, the Restoration Church, these little splinter groups that love Book of Mormon in North America, but the Community of Christ doesn't. So we've shared our message with a lot of people.
But even a lot of them
Mormons,
are moving over to the Heartland information and so forth. So back to the origins. So as far as the origins within the if you want to call it the more Latter-day aspect of the church, the whole geography thing kind of was really not a big issue for a long time, and then came a guy by the name of John Sorensen, and he looked at the geography and said, some people believed it was the entire hemisphere, some people believe it's North America, Central America, South America, and he basically came to the conclusion that based on the journeys like we're going to be talking about here in Alma, some of these journeys, and it tells us about how many days they were several times, that they're not talking about a hemispheric model. There's no way that the Book of Mormon could include all of North and South America with the narrow neck of land at Panama, and still make any sense that these guys were moving in that much. I mean, we're talking thousands and pounds, thousands of miles, and so he came to, I believe, the correct conclusion that it has to be more limited in scope.
Right.
And as far as its geography.
And even Mesoamerica believe it has to be limited in scope as well. So, but one thing I was going to say, we've got so many slides and so much stuff to show you. We could literally spend 6 hours here today. Yeah. What I want to take a moment to do is show you the website that Rod has put together and organized. I've contributed. We have got an amazing website that if you will all go to it, it's bookofmormonevidence.org. Okay, and that's where everything about what we do is there. So if you don't think, if you're wondering about that website, no, bookofmormonevidence.org. Now take a look at that for a minute and go up here to the top where you see there's a little hyping over Book of Mormon Answers. You can go to Book of Mormon Answers and get over 400 questions that you have on geography, the Hill Cumorah, the Lamanites, the Adena, that you can ask questions on. You can get more free videos. You can go to our blogs. Every day
over 100
we put out a
videos
blog.
right there. Yeah.
And the blog is bofm.blog. And you can go right there to it. We've got, Nancy and Mike have put together, look at this library up here of podcasts. We got all kinds of podcasts. You just click on that. And we've got audio podcasts they've put together. We've got this video podcast. These are all free. And then we've got additional free videos that are all right here for you. It's so amazing. The events. Look at the event tab where you want to go with Rod to see the mounds. That's right there. You go up to the bookstore. We've got probably 500 books and stuff on there that'll tell you about any subject. We've got the Stoddards up there and the Neville stuff, and Wayne May's amazing. You know, we could not go very far without saying about Wayne May. You know, I mean, he has done so much for 40 years or more on the Ancient American magazine that is amazing. And this land books, you will just learn like you just wouldn't believe from him. He has tours he takes you on. It's phenomenal stuff.
That's 5 of his books. They call them the This Land series. And because when it talks in the Book of Mormon about this land, it really makes a lot of sense when you take a look at the geography that we're going to just jump into here in just another couple of minutes.
Yeah. Let me do this. Let me say this while you're on this land.
Go ahead.
Go onto the website, and if you look at the front and you scroll down, this is really important to me. I just put this up here. It's the orange where it says this land. It shows you the Scriptures Legacy video you can watch where the church put the backgrounds of a Hopewell culture in their video. And you got to watch that. It's wonderful. And then below that, we've got Rod's comments on why the words this land, which is right here what Wayne uses, this land. Okay, it's so important. You go down there. I'm just going to read like 3 paragraphs out real quick. When Christ appeared to the Nephites as the resurrected Savior, he blessed them, he taught them, he prayed with them and for them. He also quoted to them the words of Isaiah. He reminded them that they had been given this land for their inheritance. We were warned that they would not be allowed to remain on this land if they did not remain faithful. This emphasis shows the significance of the land to the Book of Mormon people and the people who would be brought by the hand of God to this land and now occupy this land. He has got such a wonderful treatise. It's one of those. Treatise. You know, I had a friend tell me he always admired Mark Twain because he always admired a man that could spell a word more than one way and say it just as good. Anyway, but this is a great comment from Rod that you want to share with everybody. It's right here on your website. Look at all this. You want to know about Joseph Smith? Did he use the Urim and Thummim, or did he use the seer stone and a hat? Did he, look at this stuff up here about, there's all the podcasts over here. Look at all the affiliates. We got Steve Smoot, Bruce Porter, Stoddards, Jonathan Wayne, and many others that are participating in what we're doing. And can you tell we're excited? This is my favorite thing in the world to talk about.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that I last couple of things about this on the geography side of things. Very quickly, a little bit about the history here. So John Sorensen kind of started that whole thing off. It kind of reminds me, though, how many? If you want to take a guess, how many different proposed geographies are there for the Book of Mormon? There's over 150. Yeah. Over 150. It reminds me a little bit about the burned over district of New York in Joseph Smith's day, where you have all these different religions all arguing and fighting about who's who and which is right and so forth, but they're all using the same source material, the Bible, and coming up to all kinds of different conclusions. It was a source of confusion for Joseph Smith, to the point that he decided to go into that sacred grove and ask God, because he couldn't figure it out. They can't figure it out. They're all arguing with each other. Now, I think I want to point out one other thing, and that is that arguing about the geography of the Book of Mormon is very, I don't think it's a right thing to do. we've been wanting to present our information, our side of the story. We have refrained from, to the largest extent, basically showing all the reasons why the Book of Mormon could not have possibly happened in Central America. I wish I could say the same for our Central America scholars and friends, because they have put literally years and years and years of work and information and research out there trying to basically say that the Book of Mormon could not possibly have happened here in North America.
Let me share this with you. I have to say this. Yeah. This book is the culmination of Rod's lifelong endeavors. There's a lot that contributed and helped Rod. David Hocking is a great editor. We've had many that have contributed to this.
Wayne and you and Jonathan and Amberli. And
when this first came out, brothers and sisters, 5,000 of them went immediately. If you'll read my blog today, it talks about the difference between the first, second, and third edition. Now, we're not calling it first, second, and third edition. We're calling it the first and the second edition, but there's a third one, and you'll know there's 25,000 of these now printed. Anyway, when these first came out, there was every other day, a few Mesoamerican dudes would get up online and rip this to holy you-know-where. And it's still up there. Okay? And they would say, wrong, 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 fake, fake, false.
Well,
false.
in fact, they actually took the time to go through every single image that we had in the book and contact the people who we had down as the copyright holders, and trying to make trouble, just to try to find anything that they could find. And they had one or two people said, well, I didn't give them permission. It turned out we had gotten the permission through BYU, but BYU.
So we corrected whatever.
Yeah. So
but you know what?
Things.
Sales went up. Sales went up by 20,000. No, it's like the Book of Mormon on Broadway.
Yeah.
Why put it down? I mean, those are some good brethren. The Mesoamerican folks are good brethren who just don't want to think anything but Meso, and that's okay. I used to be that way, but this is amazing stuff. I just had to throw that in there. Yeah, and we probably ought to get into our slides.
That's the reason why we're using this as the source material for these Come Follow Me podcasts. So that's just one last couple of quick things on that. So bottom line is that all of this kind of culminated to, we wanted to find out, number one, what is the main purpose of the Book of Mormon? If the purpose of the Book of Mormon is about these prophecies and promises, then that's actually how we got started. That's how I got started, basically, and that's why I worked with Bruce Porter on this book. It's called Prophecies and Promises, which is that there's 36 prophecies and promises about a people and a land that was going to be established in the New World,
the United States of America.
And those 36 prophecies can and do are fulfilled in the United States of America, but there is no other nation in the Americas that can qualify in all 36 of these prophecies. And so that's actually what started it off. So we started off with the prophecies. Yeah. Then we wanted to find out, well, what did Joseph Smith know about all this? And then that led into a massive amount of research about Joseph Smith and the times and seasons and the articles and so forth. What did he know? What do we think he knows? What can we prove that he knew? What do we have speculation and so forth? And that led to basically an understanding that Joseph Smith never said anything about Central America. The stuff about Central America all came from basically these apostates who were putting bogus articles into the times and seasons, and Joseph Smith was calling them out about it over and over again. And then that led to, okay, well, what about the archaeology? And then that's when I first came out with my first DVD, which was DNA Evidence for Book of Mormon Geography back in 2007. And then in 2008 and 9, was able to scratch enough money together to actually put together a 5 DVD set. And it's called Book of Mormon Evidence Number 1. There's 5 DVDs. It's about 8 hours long. The first DVD is about the prophecies and the promises that we're talking about here. The second one is all about what did Joseph Smith know about this. Goes into detail about that. Now, this was back in 2009, and Jonathan Neville had not yet done his research, and so he just solidified and put in concrete what Joseph Smith actually knew. Then I went into the DNA evidence and so forth that was there about haplogroup X, and then the 25 archaeological correlations, because people want to see correlations between the Book of Mormon and a real place, a real people, a real culture. And then lastly, the Heartland geography. So I want to take just a couple of minutes and show you. Now, this is the very rudimentary part of it. Now, at that point in time, brothers and sisters, I didn't know exactly where everything was located. My goal was not to show where exactly, the city of Antipara was. Okay. The goal was just to put some general parameters on things that would make sense according to the approximately 550 passages in the Book of Mormon that deal with geography. That's one other little thing I got to mention this. Brothers and sisters, if geography of the Book of Mormon doesn't matter, then why did Mormon and Moroni take so much time, effort, and space on those gold plates here if that's didn't matter? If they meant for us to ignore that, why did they put it in? And if they put it in, my feeling is they want us to figure it out. Yeah. Now, the church is officially neutral, and brothers and sisters, I think there's real wisdom in that. Because we, and in fact, if nothing else, I think that one of the biggest things that President Nelson has been trying to do is to get we as members of the church to stop basically utilizing all these other things.
Learning from everybody else.
Well, you need to learn from people.
Right.
But then you take it to the Lord.
And the Lord.
You take it to the Lord and you receive your own personal understanding, your own personal revelations about this. Wow. Now, that's the only sure way to know if something's true or not. So, brothers and sisters, the things that we're going to be presenting over the next 4 weeks and the geography aspects of this, I'm going to refer back to Moroni's challenge. And he said that we could know the truth of which things? All things. Does that include the geography? Brothers and sisters, I believe that it does. When he says that we can know the truth of all things, that means that we can know the truth of where this all happened, where this took place. And now it puts it instead of a fantasy land, which is what we have basically been teaching our kids in seminary and institute. They're using a map that they think is correct to the geography,
like on positions,
but it's not
cities.
Based in reality.
Right,
it's a fantasy land map that looks like Narnia, and unfortunately, it gives kids the impression that the Book of Mormon isn't a history. Yeah. It's a fantasy. It's a really inspired fantasy, and it has some great stuff in it, but it didn't actually happen in a real-world setting. And this is what the kids in seminary and institutes are being taught, because we can't seem to come to into some kind of a conclusion. So, brothers and sisters, our hope is this. We're going to present what we believe to be overwhelming evidence that the Book of Mormon happened in the covenant and promised land that we call the United States of America. This is not a rah-rah USA thing. This has to do with a sacred covenant that God made with Adam and Eve in the very beginning, and it's continued on in every single nation. This is the last reason why I believe that the geography is important. Because the Book of Mormon is a warning to the Latter-day Nation that was going to occupy the Book of Mormon lands, that if they don't live the gospel, if they don't live the commandments of God and fulfill their part of this covenant, that they, like everyone before them, whether it's Adam and his posterity, the Jaredites and their posterity, the Nephites and their posterity, and now we've got basically the covenant people of the United States of America put under covenant by George Washington on the day of his inauguration in New York City.
You know too much.
And the bottom line is that nation is the nation that is being prophesied about and to. And if we don't at least understand what nation it is that they are prophesying to, then what's the point of the prophecies? Yeah. If the prophecies are about Chile or Guatemala, then we don't really have to worry about them too much, do we?
No.
Because it's about them, it's their problem, their prophecies.
What? If it's
the United States of America, then it becomes our problem.
And if we do not love spreading the gospel, the Book of Mormon, to our brethren and sisters, the Lamanites.
Yeah.
I love the Lamanites.
Absolutely.
Okay? And I love all Lamanites. Now, there are Lamanites in the Heartland. There's Lamanites in South America. There's Lamanites all over the world. But the Book of Mormon events happened in the Heartland of North America. And then when they got killed off, the Lamanites remained and went other places. And they went down into South America and so forth. But the heart of the North America is either true, or the heart of Mesoamerica is true, but they can't be both where the Book of Mormon happened.
We encourage people to study both.
Yeah.
Study the Mesoamerica stuff and see what they have to put down as far as, what is their land of Nephi, the land of Zarahemla, the land of Cumorah, and so forth, land Bountiful. Look at the plants, the animals, and all of the archaeological evidence and so forth that's there. Take a look at the entire thing and then compare that with what we are presenting here. And I think that what we have found is that people who have an open mind and actually really look at this, about 98, 99%, once they've been presented with both sides, come to the conclusion that this just makes so much more sense. You don't have to make stretches for everything like animals and plants and calendaring,
great.
and the entire civilization, and basically all kinds of different aspects of this. The lack of head plates, lack of breastplates, lack of swords, lack of steel.
Yep.
All that stuff is here in North America, but not there.
And if you want a great place to start, the Heartland of America is also called Moroni's America, according to Jonathan Neville. When he put this book out and I read it, I've got a dog-eared copy, and I'm telling you, 40 times probably I've been through it. Okay, maybe not that many, but sparsing through it, I've read the Book of Mormon far more than this, but this just gives me an idea. Yeah. We know Hill Cumorah is Hill Cumorah, okay? What surrounds that?
Now, how do we know that?
Okay, yeah, well...
How do we know the Hill Cumorah is the real Hill Cumorah? Well, why don't you grab that book over here of Jonathan's real quick. It's right behind there, right down at the bottom there. The reason why we know about that is because of the person who was actually involved with the actual translation process with the prophet Joseph Smith. Did something like 70% of the translation process happened with a guy that Joseph Smith actually called the president. He was a co-president with Joseph Smith at one point in time in the early church, and that's our friend Oliver Cowdery. And
Joseph helped him with some of the letters as well.
Well, he asked him to write them first off. So and then Oliver Cowdery was asked to write the early history of the church, which he did in a series of 8 letters, and those 8 letters contain letter number 7, wherein Oliver Cowdery comes out and says it's an absolute fact that the Hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon is in fact the very hill there on in Palmyra.
I've got one of the 4 divine documents, I believe. This is letter 7. Well, now, yes, it's pretend, but it looks pretty cool. This is letter 7, and it talks about specifically that Hill Cumorah is Hill Cumorah. It's a fact, they say. The one right here on Canandaigua Road, 3 miles from Palmyra, is the Hill Cumorah where the final battles happened. And I've got 150 prophets and apostles and others that have said that same thing. But if you will read letter 7, it's one of the 4 documents. Let me go through and show you these documents right here. Right here. These are my 4 divine documents. That's one, letter 7. Okay? That's amazing. My second letter is this one from on the banks of the Illinois River, June 1st to 3rd, 1834. And this is the letter that Joseph Smith wrote to Emma. Yep. Not the exact one, but it looks like it, right? Okay. She said, Joseph Smith said, we've been wandering over the plains of the Nephites, picking up the skulls and the bones of that once beloved people of the Lord, and shows that this Book of Mormon is divinely authentic. I paraphrased, but because of picking up the skulls and the bones in that plains of the Nephites, where their bones found, where they found the third letter.
That's
the
Zelf.
Third letter. No, you can't jump ahead.
Okay.
To Zelf. Yeah. And then there's the Zelf letter. I got these 4 documents that are just amazing. And all of these help me to understand that Zelf was a warrior, that Zelf lived and was one of the last that fought in Illinois, Valley City, Illinois. And then you've got Revelations, D&C 125 and 128. D&C 125 is Joseph Smith saying it from Nauvoo, brethren, go across the river and build up a city unto the Lord and put the name of Zarahemla upon it.
And by the way,
to me is a great possibility that's where it is.
And by the way, we have had really well-schooled historians who have actually verified that the first ever time that the area across from Nauvoo was mentioned as being called Zarahemla, which, by the way, you can look it up, and it's in Doctrine and Covenants, section 125, verse 3. How many of you would like to know, where Zarahemla is located? Well, in this revelation that the Lord gave to Joseph Smith, he said that build up a city on the land on the opposite side of the city of Nauvoo and call it Zarahemla. Now, why would the Lord call that Zarahemla if it isn't just as a symbolic thing? Well, actually, we cover this a lot in our different books and so forth. But the bottom line is basically some people have said, oh, well, they were calling that Zarahemla long before that. That actually is not true. We now know that from a historical standpoint, the first time that was ever called Zarahemla was when the Lord called it such.
Yeah.
And then Joseph Smith put that in Revelations, and later on historians went back into some of the church history and actually made alterations to that later on and so forth. But the first stake ever of the church was the Zarahemla stake of Zion, which is across the river in what they called the half-breed tract. It was the original tract of land the church actually
Montrose,
owned.
Iowa is.
About 10 times more land on the west side of the river than they did on the east side and the Nauvoo side.
And speaking of names, the name Cumorah, the Mesoamericans say that Orson Pratt was the first to call the hill Cumorah in 1833. No, that's incorrect. If you'll go and look at Lucy Mack Smith's history, in 1827, Joseph Smith was out looking at the plates, one of his 4 times visiting, okay? He came rushing back, and he was reprimanded by the angel for not being adequately prepared. Joseph Smith came running back into the house with Joseph Sr. and Lucy Mack, and he was saying, oh, I'm so upset, and his father said, what's going on? Who are those guys? I'll get them for you. No, Father. The angel who met me there at the hill Cumorah. Lucy Mack Smith said in 1827, we'll call it Hill Cumorah in her history. Yeah. And there's other times, my friends, go to the Book of Mormon Evidence.org website and pull open the geography packet. There's like 50 reasons why Cumorah is Cumorah.
You bet.
Okay? Man, I love it.
Okay, so that's what
let's get into
we
some of this.
Call it the pin in the map and so forth. So let me just really quickly show you. So this is the very rudimentary early stuff, and then I'm going to have Rian kind of get into the more detailed stuff, and then we're going to be able to talk more precisely about where is actually Alma going in these different journeys that he takes. So we're going to go to, this is section number 15. This is actually from the Book of Mormon Evidence 5 DVD series. This is the one that we're talking about just a little bit earlier. This is disc number 5, Book of Mormon Lands, Mapping the Book of Mormon. I'm not going to go into detail. You have to get the disc to be able to watch the whole thing, but let me just point out a few things. And first off, when it came down to Lehi's ocean voyage, a lot of people have speculated that they landed on the Pacific coast, on the west coast. There's nothing that says specifically that they landed on the west coast of the United States or Central America. They didn't necessarily go across the Pacific. We believe they went across the Atlantic, and that actually matches up with the Earth's currents, the ocean currents and so forth, and that's actually been proven out by a ship expedition, which now it is not, brothers and sisters, it is not a question as to whether or not a ship could make it from the Saudi Arabian Peninsula to the United States. It's been done in a 600 BC replica ship called the Phoenicia Expedition. If you're not already familiar with that, there's this book right here. It's called Sailing Close to the Wind, or Sailing, Close to the Wind. This is by Philip Beale. He's a former naval officer with the UK, navigation, basically. Yeah. And basically, he had a 600 BC replica ship made of the Phoenician ship replica. And who were the Phoenicians? They were the ancient seafaring people that lived, guess where? Just west of Jerusalem.
And if you read my blog, it's possible the Phoenicians are linked to the Cherokee.
Yes, exactly. So there's a lot of information about that. This is actually the first expedition. If you've been watching our podcast, I think it was the third or fourth podcast, we had Boyd Tuttle, who actually was on the expedition that has now proven the Mulekite voyage is possible in a 600 BC replica ship, which Mulek was also leaving about the same time as Lehi to come to the New World. So they would have been using the same kind of ship technologies, except for the Lord actually blessed Nephi with specific instructions on how to build his ship. But he didn't build an aircraft carrier, and he didn't build a powered ship. It was a wooden sailing ship. And that's why this is a great analog to Lehi's ocean voyage. But it actually, no one in the world can now say that it's not possible that somebody could go from the Saudi Arabian Peninsula to the United States, because it's not only possible, it's now been done. It's end of story. Cool. There is no more discussion as to whether or not that could happen. But the interesting thing is, even the very best ancient maritime historians and the people who are actually doing this, they didn't even realize what was going to happen. It was a total shock to them. They were actually scared to death, for a good period of time, because they were actually taken away from the route that they intended to go, and that route ended up taking them right over towards America.
Right.
So it's just a fascinating
Don't
thing.
be fooled by those that talk about the Bering Strait as how everything got over here. Man, there's maritime all over the place from the Atlantic. Yeah. It's just amazing.
People knew how to build a ship ever since basically Noah built one. Although there are people who don't believe that Noah's Ark was even a real thing and that there was really no Noah's Ark. So
for example, maybe flipping to this one, I can just comment briefly. This slide simply shows the three routes of Christopher Columbus as he came over, went close to or on San Salvador. Mm-hmm. Mulek came across and landed in Tampa, Florida, just recently with this Phoenician ship. And look at the bottom one, the one in blue is Lehi's route, and they all went through the same area in pink there. I think that's an important land. It's probably also where the city of Enoch probably was, right there, that little gulf. But everything kind of comes up right through there. And we believe the Mulekites probably ended up at the Mississippi River and sailed all the way up the Mississippi to Zarahemla without stopping. The Des Moines Rapids stopped them there. And we'll talk
we're going to talk more about that here in just a couple minutes. So basically, if we go to the, we actually, if we can slide it over here to this other computer there for just a second. So what we, most people are aware of the fact that that hurricanes, when they typically come into the area, they come from the south and from the east, and they come up into the west and to the north. And so we actually see that happening here. For example, this is Hurricane Hugo. You can actually see that happening. But most of the time, it actually comes up into the Gulf Coast areas. So that the geography that we're talking about, we call it the Heartland geography. It's kind of funny because people have tried to make issue about it being called Heartland, but this is normally and naturally called the Heartland of America. The people who live in these areas call themselves, this is the Heartland. In fact, there's trucking companies who are from there called Heartland Trucking, so forth. So I know people have said, well, this is a jingo thing or whatever. They're trying to just play on our heartstrings. No, this is actually accurate to the area.
We've got Heartland Research. We're looking all over for Nephite stuff, all over Ohio.
That's right. So this is the Heartland model. Now the other thing that we talked about, how we were using the prophecies and promises, identifying the United States of America as the promised land, and then Joseph Smith was consistent with those prophecies. But then we had to look at really the archaeology. What kind of archaeology is there that might support this? And this was actually one of the early things that we found here. This is the distribution of what's called the Hopewell mound builders, and there were 4 major concentrations of their earthworks, and this is their culture. So there was one down by Florida, on the panhandle of Florida, around Tallahassee, Florida. Then there was another one that basically was further up around the Tennessee area. This is the very southwestern end of the Appalachian Mountains in that area. And then there was a huge concentration over there on the Mississippi River, on both sides of the Mississippi River. And then there was another concentration just north of the Ohio River. And these are the primary Hopewell interaction sphere. These are the major archaeological sites in this book. Now, this book is an old book with the Indiana Historical Society. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast, basically, the area around Tallahassee, Florida, would be the land of Nephi area. The area above that to the north and to a little bit to the west would be basically the Tennessee area or the land of Nephi area. Then you have up along the Mississippi River Valley, you have the Zarahemla area, which is the largest of them, and then you have the Ohio River Valley area, which is the land Bountiful area. Now, if you watch, you can actually see that they still have archaeological sites that go all the way up to this place that we call Cumorah. And there's archaeological sites up there, and we'll talk more about that in the next few weeks. So, then if you overlay that map onto a map of the United States, you can actually see kind of what we're talking about here and how this all kind of fits onto a map. These are Mississippian sites. These are later on adapted from mound builders and cliff dwellers. This is from their book there. This is a different one, and then this is a composite of all three of the overlaid maps. If you take a look at it, they all match up pretty amazingly well. Now, this is all clear back in 2009. I was just trying to find just kind of the general lands, and you'll see that there's been major improvements and more specificity when it comes down to these particular lands and their borders and so forth that have been done and accomplished by Rian and Jonathan Neville and with the help of Wayne May and many other people who've helped with this. This is in Ether. It basically talks about this is interesting. It talks about in Ether chapter 10 verse 20. It says that and they built a great city by the narrow neck of land, by the place where the sea divides the land. And as I thought about that, I thought, where in Central America do you have a place where the seas divide the land? Because down there, the land is dividing the seas. Mm-hmm. But here in North America, we have seas, basically, and also you need to understand that the word for sea in the Hebrew is the same word as the Sea of Galilee or the Mediterranean Sea. They use the same word. Or the Dead Sea, because basically any body of water is that word. Mm-hmm. So they didn't have a separate word, in Hebrew at least, to be able to differentiate between different sizes of bodies of water. So they just called everything a sea. Right. So if you understand the Great Lakes, those would easily be considered a sea, especially if you consider the Sea of Galilee is not even a drop in the bucket compared to the Lake Michigan or Lake Erie or whatever. And so these are massive bodies of water, and they clearly divide the land. So this is a place where the geography of the Book of Mormon actually makes sense when you have big seas that are dividing the land rather than the other way around. Then you have the land of first inheritance. Basically, they arrived at the Promised Land. They did pitch our tents, and we called it the Promised Land. This happens to be the same continent, or this, and even the same general area here as Adam and Eve and their posterity. Basically, they were all in the Heartland area of America. And then if we go to the land of Nephi, they journeyed many days in the wilderness. They journeyed for the space of many days. We pitched our tents, and we called it the land of Nephi. And if you take a look at where I had it down here, it's a little bit low from where we're going to be going here in the next couple of weeks as we flesh out this. This was just my first attempt at doing the geography. Then there was the land of Zarahemla, which is basically when King Mosiah basically left the land of Nephi, went up to the land of Zarahemla, and then they found the Mulekites up there. And so this is also where then later on Alma the elder actually made his way back to the land of Zarahemla there. And we know that Zarahemla, that the river Sidon was on the west, or on the east side of the city of Zarahemla. But the land and cities, that's another thing we need to talk about, Ryan. We need to make sure we cover the difference between and why this is important when it says city of versus land of.
Right.
What is the difference there? And then then later on, as we get, then this is the Alma chapter 22, and we're going to get into that in detail. But this is my first opportunity to kind of flesh that out, and you can kind of see the Lamanite lands, the Nephite lands, and then the land Bountiful, basically the Ohio River Valley. The land of Zarahemla is essentially the Mississippi River Valley, with the land of Nephi being up in the Appalachian Mountains, or at least the southern end of that. And so you can see that land of desolation. Didn't really know for sure where to put that, but we have that now in more detail. And then later on, talked about desolation, the land of the Lamanites, and how the Lamanites were basically, the Nephites were nearly surrounded by the Lamanites. And so that we're going to get into this a little bit later. This is just showing here the Great Lakes as they are today, the Great Lakes how they may have been when they were back in that time frame when they were 50 feet higher. That reference I gave you before here was actually talking about this from the Pioneer History of the Holland Purchase of Western New York by O. Turner back in 1849. That they talk about that the remains of the native peoples at that point were almost always 50 feet above the current lake levels at that point in time, and we have the evidence now that shows that the lake levels were indeed higher anciently, and created some swamps and so forth. But those actually would extend out. This is a map I made before we knew about the Great Black Swamp and the Grand Kankakee Marsh, which is something that Ryan actually helped to discover, and it's just showing the difference there. And then finally, just going to last couple of things. I talked about a narrow neck of land in between there, but wait till you see what Ryan has discovered with Jonathan Neville and so forth here. And then there's a couple of the references here in Alma chapter 22, and then also in Helaman chapter 4, verse 7, talking about it being a day's journey for a Nephite, or a day and a half journey for a Nephite in another case. A narrow neck of land between basically a west sea and some point over on the east. And this is, again, an early guess here, the land of desolation, a generalized map. And when you understand, then we have 10 geographic map anchors back in 2009. I call them map anchors because these are things that were known either by revelation or from Joseph Smith, or from the scriptures, or also from the DNA analysis and so forth. So you can go through those 10 items there if you'd like to stop the video for a minute. And then basically talk about a narrow pass, and it talked about being a land of liberty. And we go into all this is more detail. It's interesting also here in Helaman chapter 3, it gives 4 cardinal direction seas. They said from the sea south to the sea north, from the sea west to the sea east. And this gives an opportunity to kind of see what that might have looked like if you had, from the perspective of somebody who was in the heartland of America. These were gigantic seas, or large bodies of water, they actually call them, that are the Great Lakes that basically break into 4 cardinal direction seas. We're not going to get into this information about the earthquakes and so forth at this point in time. We're going to cover that when we get down to 3rd Nephi. But basically, this also gives us some indication of travel and distance and things like that. So we're going to talk about that here coming up. If you'd like to get more information about that, I'd advise you to get a hold of the DVD set and watch the DVD. The DVD on this is actually about almost 2 hours long just on its own. And anyway, so we've been talking about the geography of the Book of Mormon, and we've covered a lot of different aspects of that. As you know, we've been doing this last 4 lessons or so through the beginning parts of Alma. And so now we want to go back to the scriptures here with an understanding of the geography information and see how does this actually kind of look, or how does this play out in the geography of the heartland of America with Alma and the sons of Mosiah, different journeys that they took. So we're going to start again. If we can go ahead and get out your annotated edition of the Book of Mormon. This is lesson number 22. This is Alma chapters 5 through 7. We're going to basically now go through Alma 5 all the way through 22, and kind of go through the rest of the geography information as well. So to start off here in chapter 5. we talked a little bit about in the very beginning. We talked a little bit about being thankful and so forth for the things that God has given us, and that's one of the attributes of Alma as he goes out and starts to reclaim or proclaim the gospel to the people. And then he talks about in verse 14 of chapter 5, he says, "And now, behold, I ask you, my brethren of the church, have ye spiritually been born of God? Have you received his image in your countenances? Have you experienced this mighty change in your hearts?" I'll never forget one of the example that had a really profound impact on myself, and that is that there was a story of a guy who was watching a silversmith, actually working on taking a piece of silver and getting the impurities out of it. And he would heat it up and then work with it and get the more impurities out. Then he would get rid of those, and then he'd basically heat it up again. And this process of heating over and over again. And the guy says, "Well, how do you know when the process is over? How do you know when it's fully purified?" And the silversmith says, "It's fairly easy." He says, "What? Well, what is it?" He says, "I know it's pure when I can see myself, my likeness or my image in the reflection of the silver."
Wow.
He says, "Then I know it's pure enough, and then I can go ahead and work with it and make it into a beautiful
So
things."
you're burning off the bad or the impure to get the whole. I've always loved Alma chapter 5 because it asks, 40 to 50 questions
Yeah.
that let you reflect. Have I been born of God?
Yeah.
Have you got his image on your countenance? And when I'm having a difficult time, I refer a lot to Alma 5:14 because it helps me to understand where am I on this level of needs. It always helps me get back to where I know I need to be. Because if I can't answer but 3 or 4 of those in the affirmative, I'm way off. Or in the in affirmative,
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yes. Well, and that's one of the cause of deep reflection when you can actually go through. It says, "Are you stripped of pride? Are you stripped of envy? Do you make a mock of your brother?" I mean, these are all just wonderful checks to kind of reality checks. Is this something that I'm doing? Have I forgotten about this? Because there's so many different things that we're trying to focus on in our lives that it really helps us to go back to some of the basics here and actually do a check. How am I doing in this case? And sometimes it's not that easy to be honest with yourself either. But anyway, so
this is really where the church begins, almost, isn't it? Where the church is now going to start getting we've got some position of permanence, so to speak, instead of moving around. And there's a little bit of permanence here with Alma, but it's not going to last, right? I mean, there's going to be other upheaval, but we've got kind of a foundation for a church. And he's kind of laying that out as a sermon to guide us by, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. So then this is also, we're talking about Alma the younger here.
Right.
And it says, "Behold, I have fasted and prayed many days that I might know these things of myself." And that's one of the other things that, we brought this up several times in this podcast and another previous podcast, but don't just take the things that we're saying as this is absolutely true, but literally study them out in your own mind and pray about them and find out the answers for yourself.
If it's important to you, you'll find out the truth because the Lord says we can know those things.
That's right. And that's Alma the younger testifies of this. Then let's go ahead and move to chapter 6. That's Alma's. By the way, this is Alma's servants throughout Zarahemla. So he was there. This is with his hometown, basically. So he was preaching and teaching this to the people who knew him, and actually probably the people he was doing the most damage to. With he and the sons of Mosiah as they were rebelling against God.
And you're thinking all the Mulekites were just fascinated because they didn't know a lot of this stuff. They didn't have written records, and now they're getting an opportunity to hear the great Alma preach what God's all about.
Yep. Okay, so we go to Alma chapter 6, and then in this particular case, and then we're gonna go into a little bit of geography. This is the reason why we've done all this whole geography thing, so we can kind of start to see how this actually plays out and how it fits beautifully in the heartland of America. But Alma, basically in verse 7, he heads to he leaves Zarahemla, and he goes to the valley of Gideon to preach. In verse 7 it says, "And now it came to pass that when Alma had made these regulations, he departed from them, yea, from the church, was in the city of Zarahemla." So it's not just the land of Zarahemla, he's in the city of Zarahemla. and went over upon the east of the river Sidon into the valley of Gideon. And so this valley of Gideon is across the river Sidon, basically on the east side of the river. So that tells you that Zarahemla was on the west side.
Right.
Like went over the river.
They're seeing.
That's right. There having been a city built, which was called the city of Gideon, which was in the valley, which was called Gideon, being called after the man who was slain by the hand of Nehor with the sword. And so here they are. They find themselves in the valley of Gideon. Okay, that's where Alma is located. And so this is the next chapter, chapter 7, begins with the mission of Alma as he is preaching to the people in the land of Gideon, it says. Okay, so this is where he's at. So,
and that would be just south of Zarahemla on the map, and also the map on, what page is that?
On page 213 in the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon is a map that shows these 5 journeys of Alma to these different locations. So the first one, go ahead and tell us about
Well, Zarahemla
each different one.
To Gideon. So he leaves the area of Nauvoo and goes down into Gideon, which is just south of there. And he does a repeat. He goes to Gideon and then back again. And then on his second trip,
there is actually east
south. Well, it's actually south of there. South. It might be a little east, but on the map it shows just south. But it could be southeast. Again, we don't know the exact locations of all these, but then he goes from Zarahemla after he's gone to Midian, back to Zarahemla, Gideon. He goes all the way to Melech, and Melech, we believe, as close as we can say, would be maybe sometimes around St. Louis, like northern St. Louis, around Charles City, Missouri, is what we're guessing based upon some information. So he goes there and preaches. And then from Melech, he goes all the way up, look at line number 3, goes all the way over to Ammonihah. And Ammonihah is, we think, close to Havana, Illinois. Mm-hmm. And there's some things, I think, in Havana where there's some really cool mounds and things in that area, isn't there?
You bet, yeah. The Rockwell Mounds Historic Site, it's about 83 miles from basically the Valley of Gideon area over to the Rockwell Mound site in Havana. And that's if you're doing 8 hours a day, about 3.5 miles an hour, it'd take you about 3 days to get up there. So it's between 3 and 5 days if you're just taking about 8 hours a day. And anyway, so the interesting thing about the area of Havana there and the Rockwell Mound, it's one of the biggest mounds as far as the base, but it doesn't go up very high. It's a relatively lower mound. But it's a huge thing. In fact, there's a city park there, and they have a big pavilion, and it just sits on one portion of that mound. Mm-hmm. And it's probably about a 150-person pavilion up there. But there's some other really interesting things. Definitely Hopewell Mound Builder stuff is pretty close to the river there. I think it's the Illinois River that's going through there.
Yeah.
And
it's Illinois and the Sangamon. The Sangamon goes through there too.
Yeah. But there was a big city there, and so this is what we think. That's the reason why we're thinking maybe that might be Ammonihah, because it seems like it was a pretty significant city.
Yeah, and of course we know what happens later at that great city, but that seemingly is one of the great cities that's going to really experience death. Total death and destruction here. Yeah. But from there, Alma continued on to Sidon, which is just down on the Sangamon River, we're thinking, kind of that general area. Yeah. And then back, his last one is Sidon back to Zarahemla. And I don't know if he went cross land like it shows on the map, or if he went rivers back or whatever, but it probably depends a lot on if anybody was mad at him or attacking him, or what route do I have to go to get back home to my family. Yeah. But what would you guess? Maybe 15, 20, 30, 40 miles? I don't know.
What's that?
Of Alma going from Sidon to Ammonihah, or would it be maybe 40
Ammonihah, yeah, probably about 40, 50 miles, something like that.
Yeah, something maybe like that. Now, I also know
By the way, this is complete speculation.
Yeah,
Obviously, we do not know
Jenny
for sure.
Hurley, and she thinks that Sidon and Ammonihah are probably north of Zarahemla, possibly, in a different location. So you'll want to look at her idea as well. In fact, if you go to my blog under an article from her, it's called The Sacred Mounds of Nauvoo. on my blog, and you can see what she feels fits in, because she's got a really a good feeling about some of these issues.
Mm-hmm. You bet. Okay, so then from there, then basically, they came back over to the land of Zarahemla. That's in Alma chapter 15, verses 17 and 18. Yeah. So he returned back from Sidon back to Zarahemla, completing the round trip there. Okay, so if we go over here, let me see here. Chapter 8 is when Alma returns from the land of Gideon after having taught the people of Gideon many things, and he returned to his own house at Zarahemla. Then Alma preaches to the land in the land of Melech. So this is verse 3. It came to pass in the commencement of the 10th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, that Alma departed from thence and took his journey over into the land of Melech on the west of the river Sidon.
Right, so and that's probably St. Charles, Missouri, St. Louis, over in that area.
Yep, so that you can see that on the map there. That would be on the west of the river Sidon, on the west by the borders of the wilderness, and began to teach the people of Melech according to the holy order of God, which he had been called. Then is that in verse 6, and so that when he had finished his work at Melech, he departed thence and traveled 3 days' journey on the north of the land of Melech, and he came to a city which was called Ammonihah. So from Melech he went north, right, which you can see there. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then he came to the land of Ammonihah. It came to pass that when Alma had come to the city of Ammonihah, so then first he entered into the land, and then from there he continued basically and found the city of Ammonihah, and he began to preach the word of the God to them. Now Satan had gotten a great hold upon the hearts of the people of the city of Ammonihah, and they basically rejected him. And so he was actually then leaving. He took his journey. This is verse 13, the end of it. He says, and he took his journey towards the city which was called Aaron. And then basically an angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, no, go back to Ammonihah. So he said...
Just like Nineveh. And, go back to those people. You got to do something.
Yep. He says, behold, I am he that hath delivered it unto you, and behold, I am sent to command thee that thou return to the city of Ammonihah and preach again unto the people of the city. He preach unto them, yea, say unto them, except they repent, the Lord God will destroy them. For behold, they do study at this time that they may destroy the liberty of thy people.
So this is a second warning to that city that is important because we know what happens coming up.
Mm-hmm. And now, if you have the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, in verse 17, you see the gold bars there on that that says, they do study at this time that they may destroy the liberty of thy people. I find it interesting that they use the term study at this time. And because why would they study something that's, to destroy the liberty of the people?
I think it's true. I never thought of that before. Why would they study?
Because it doesn't just happen by accident.
Right. They would really.
They have to plan it.
Right.
They are literally making plans to overthrow them and to bring people into subjection.
That's a good point. I never realized that word until.
Yeah, and people need to realize that this is what happens when people lose their freedom. And I brought this up a couple of weeks ago in one of the previous podcasts, but I said, when it comes down to it, look at the people that are in the scriptures that have become slaves or have become enslaved to other people. What is it that got them into the captivity? Mm-hmm. It was free stuff. In the case of the Israelites, basically, the Israel and his family, Jacob and his family. They basically went into Egypt because they were going to get free food and free land.
Happening today, isn't it? In our government.
And they said, oh, yeah, well, let's take advantage of that. Well, after a while, the Egyptians are saying, hey, this is our food and our land, and now you got to start paying for this stuff. Yeah. Well, the same thing happened to Zeniff. He comes down into the land of the Lamanites. King Laban basically set a plan or set a trap for him. Mm-hmm. And, oh yeah, we'll give you all the land you want. Just go ahead, help yourself. In fact, we'll kick our people off of the land for you, so you can have that land. And after a few years, what happens?
They own you.
You need to pay us taxes, tribute for taking our land, and so forth. And the same thing is how Satan almost always enslaves people. Mm-hmm.
And who are the most wicked people? The ones that have seen the light and then gone to the other side.
Yeah, and they
like
actually
the
talk about
Amalekites
this.
and the others that are on that side, the apostate groups.
Yep. So basically, in this particular case, so it said, they study at this time that they may destroy the liberty of thy people. If you turn to the next page, on page 216, this is something I think we've talked about it once before early on in the podcast.
This is so good, you have to share this.
But I'm just going to just a quick version.
This is something when I first heard it at one of his 8,500 or so speeches I've heard him. I mean, he brings this one up, and it, after probably the fourth or fifth time of me hearing it, I finally understood it, and it's made a significant difference in everything I think about with freedom and with liberty and with what it is and what it isn't, and how it's misused, and how we don't even really understand it if we don't understand these principles. So I'd love people to grab
because basically this is something that I really wanted to find out more about the difference between that. And it mostly came down to, in 2 Nephi chapter 2, it says that they are free to choose, and it gives two choices. One, to choose liberty and eternal life, or choice number two is to choose captivity and death. Which sounded to me like liberty was a conscientious choice. It wasn't like freedom, which was, and that's what they basically has in page 216 here. So if you have the your Annotated Book of Mormon, you can look this up. But this is from Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary. This is the first English dictionary that was ever put together here. He said that this is, to be free is a noun. The first reference to this, it says being at liberty, not being under necessity or restraint, either physical or moral. So basically, no moral or physical restraints. You can do whatever you want. The fifth reference to this in under free, the word free is unconstrained, unrestrained, not under compulsion or control. A man is free to pursue his own choice. He enjoys free will. So that's what free is, and freedom is a state of exemption from the power or control of another. Yeah. So basically, freedom is essentially being free. You can do whatever you want.
It's
you
tyranny.
Can be as
it's
good.
Whatever.
Well, it's anti-tyranny. It's basically
That's
do
true.
whatever you want.
That's right. Anything.
Yeah. You can be as good or as bad as you want to.
Right.
But liberty, on the other hand, it says with the first definition here under liberty, it says freedom from restraint in a general sense and applicable to the body or to the will or mind. The body is at liberty when it's not confined. The will or mind is at liberty when not checked or controlled. A man enjoys liberty when no physical force operates to restrain his actions or volitions. So no restraint, basically. The second one is that natural liberty consists in the power of acting as one thinks fit without any restraint or control except from the laws of nature.
From the laws of nature.
But generally, men mean by nature the author of created things or the operation of his power. In other words, it's talking about where the laws of nature come from. They come from God. Actually,
That's
if you
what
look it up.
Me. The laws of nature. It's just like in our Constitution.
Yep.
That's what hit me, that the laws of nature, that's the laws of God, I mean,
right.
We have to live in a place that we're not totally free to do whatever. I mean, we can, but there's consequences. But how about if we live where there's a few things God wants, and we adhere to a few things, we'll be happy. And he really asks very little of us, doesn't he?
That's right. So he says, this is the fifth one. It says, religious liberty is the free right of adopting and enjoying opinions on religious subjects and of worshiping the Supreme Being according to the dictates of our conscience without any external controls. And so that's what basically freedom is and liberty is according to the Noah Webster's dictionary. Now, the thing I find is interesting is when it talks about the laws of nature, or nature's God, basically is what a lot of times they'll refer to that. In the Book of Mormon, it actually gives us the best definition, which is right there in 2 Nephi, which I mentioned before. It says, wherefore men are free according to the flesh, and all things are given them which are expedient unto man, and they are free to choose, choice number one, liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all men, or to choose, choice number two, captivity and death, according to the captivity and power of the devil, for he seeketh that all men might be miserable like unto himself. And thus he was preparing to support their liberty, their lands, their wives, and their children, and their peace, that they might live unto the Lord their God, and that they might maintain that which was called by their enemies the cause of Christians. And that was from Alma chapter 48, verse 10. And then this is where it talks about this. For behold, They do study at this time that they may destroy the liberty of thy people. For thus saith the Lord, which is contrary to the statutes and judgments and commandments which he has given unto his people. Freedom provides the ability, basically, to choose. Liberty is the choice. Once you make the choice to follow God, that is where liberty comes from. And what I find is absolutely phenomenal is that in the United States, we have a number of iconic things that and how many times do we ever find? In fact, it's interesting. We've looked, and we have not been able to find yet any instance of any of the founding fathers of the United States of America referring to this as the land of freedom.
Yep.
They inevitably talk about it being the land of liberty.
Isn't there a freedom bell?
Well, there's the Statue of Freedom.
The Statue of Freedom.
Okay, no, it's the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
And the Liberty Bell.
That's right.
Right? Because those are, what this is saying is that God's nation, the nation that is under covenant with him, is basically making a choice. Mm-hmm. They've given up freedom in the sense of basically
for these few little things God expects.
Right. And instead they are adopting liberty, which is basically saying we are under God's law.
Yeah.
And that's what liberty is. Mm-hmm. And that's why we need to stop making the mistake of saying how that freedom is the same.
We are.
It's not the same. Freedom means you can be as wicked as you want to be or as righteous as you want to be. Liberty is when you've made the choice to be righteous.
And that's why if you look at under our banner today of the United States government, we always talk about we have to give up a little bit of our own liberties to get a little more freedom, and how that keeps working. And it seems like
more security.
More security.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We give up enough security. Okay. Well, in the hopes that we'll get more of this freedom stuff. Well, freedom isn't that great. Liberty is what's great, because we're living under God's law and we'll get what he expects of us, and we're doing it to honor him, whereas freedom is do whatever you want, whoever. It doesn't matter who you're hurting.
Well, ultimately, freedom can lead to anarchy.
Yeah.
Which is basically everybody just does whatever they want to, and they with no regard to anyone else.
And there's no morality. I mean, it's like in our government today, the immorality is absolutely... I remember when I was younger, I used to think that government seriously was 80% great. I really did. It was just, everything, salute the flag, everything's great. Now I think maybe 20% of our government is good, meaning the people within it that we elect. There's a lot of people when in D&C 121.
Well, we see the things that have been going on in the government and the lies and deception and the working with the media that's complicit with so much of this stuff.
Right, because in D&C 121, when it says it's the mind of almost all men, that when they get a little bit of power, okay, and that's what's happened to our government. It's almost all men are that way. You, I, we all are. We want a little more power. We want a little more, and it's hard to be moral. Mm-hmm. But it's easy under liberty. If you're in Zarahemla, you'd be going south, but you'd be going up in elevation. So north and south does not necessarily mean directional. It could mean the topography and the riverbeds. You mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, up is not necessarily north, and down is not necessarily south. Mm-hmm. North or up means up in elevation, and south. I wanted to, if we can...
switch over? We could go for 5.5 hours.
If you like this Come Follow Me supplemental study, click the like button and share it with your friends. Be sure to go to bookofmormonevidence.org, which is a hub with all the links that you would like to the podcasts, to upcoming events, the store, 200 plus answers about the Book of Mormon, as well as links to our streaming site, which now has over 100 new videos from our virtual expo. If you want to see the expo, go to comefollowme2020.org, and you can also see them on the streaming site, bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com.